Briarcliff Hall had stood on the bluffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean for nearly a century. Built in 1927 by a steel magnate with more money than taste, it had passed through a dozen hands before falling into disrepair in the early 2000s. When I first saw it 3 years ago, the gardens were overgrown. The ballroom ceiling was water-stained, and the grand staircase had a crack running through 3 of its marble steps. I had fallen in love with it immediately. Now, standing in the restored foyer with its gleaming chandeliers and polished floors, I watched my family attempt to destroy the wedding I had spent 2 years planning. "We're canceling this venue," my mother announced to Marin, the event coordinator, with a kind of authority that came from decades of getting exactly what she wanted. "The wedding is off." Marin, a composed woman in her 50s who had coordinated hundreds of events in this space, looked from my mother to me with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Halloway, but I don't have any cancellation request from the bride. The bride doesn't know what she's doing." My mother cut her off with a wave of her hand. "She can't afford this place anyway. We all know this wedding is a fantasy that's gone on long enough." My father stepped forward, his corporate attorney persona fully activated. "We'll need a full refund of whatever deposit was paid. I'm sure you understand that under the circumstances, holding funds for an event that won't be taking place would be legally questionable." "Russell, please." My Aunt Bernice placed a hand on his arm, though her expression suggested support rather than restraint. "Let them handle this professionally." The them in question was the small army of family members who had descended on Briarcliff Hall that morning, ostensibly for a final walkthrough before tomorrow's ceremony. My mother, my father, Aunt Bernice, Uncle Lowell, my grandmother Edith, my younger sister Delaney, and Delaney's husband, Brooks, all gathered in the foyer like a jury that had already reached its verdict. I stood slightly apart from the group next to my fiancé, Callum, who was gripping my hand so tightly I could feel my engagement ring pressing into my finger. His parents, Nora and Stephen Ives, flanked his other side, their faces reflecting the same bewildered horror I felt. "Mrs. Halloway," Marin tried again, her professional smile showing strain. "I really need to speak with Miss Halloway directly about any changes to the event. Leora has nothing to say." My mother turned to look at me, her expression a mixture of pity and contempt that I had become intimately familiar with over the past 31 years. "Do you, sweetheart? You can't actually afford this venue. You can't afford that dress you picked out. You certainly can't afford to marry someone without a real career." Callum stiffened beside me. He was a marine ecologist who had spent the last decade studying kelp forest restoration, work that was important and meaningful even if it didn't come with a corner office or a 7-figure salary. "That's completely uncalled for," Nora Ives said sharply. "Is it?" My mother raised an eyebrow. "I'm simply stating facts. Leora works at a non-profit. Callum studies fish. Between the two of them, they probably make less than Delaney's shoe budget." She laughed at her own joke, and several family members joined in. Delaney, my younger sister by 4 years, smiled prettily. She had always been the golden child, married at 25 to Brooks, an investment banker who came from old money and worked at a firm that managed even older money. Their wedding had been a $1.8 million affair at the Regency Astor Hotel, featured in 3 bridal magazines and talked about in our family with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. My wedding, by contrast, had been met with skepticism from the moment I announced my engagement. "The venue alone is $92,000, my father said, addressing Marin as if I weren't standing right there. "There's no way Leora could have afforded the deposit, let alone the full amount. Either she's committed fraud or someone else is paying for this. Either way, we need to sort it out now before this charade goes any further." "It's not a charade," I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. It was the first time I had spoken since the ambush began. "Oh, honey." My mother's voice dripped with condescension. "We know you want this to be real. We know you've dreamed of a beautiful wedding in a beautiful place, but dreams don't pay bills. And frankly, after everything Callum's family has failed to contribute," she shot a pointed look at Nora and Stephen, "it's time for someone to be honest with you." "We offered to contribute," Stephen Ives said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Multiple times. You refused. Contribute what? A few thousand. My father laughed. This venue costs more than your house. The insult hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Nora's face went red. Callum made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a word. That's enough. I released Callum's hand and stepped forward, placing myself between my family and his. You don't get to come into my wedding venue and insult my future in-laws. Your wedding venue? Delaney laughed. Please. You can barely afford your apartment. You drive a 12-year-old Civic. Last Christmas, you gave everyone homemade gifts because you couldn't afford real presents. I gave homemade gifts because I thought they were meaningful. You gave homemade gifts because you're broke. Delaney examined her manicure with studied disinterest. Just admit it. This whole thing is some kind of elaborate delusion. Either that or you're in debt up to your eyeballs. Grandmother Edith, who had been silent until now, stepped forward with the aid of her silver-handled cane. At 83, she was still the family matriarch, her opinion carrying more weight than anyone else's. Leora dear, her voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to protect you. You've always been the dreamer of the family, head in the clouds, as your grandfather used to say. But there comes a time when dreams need to give way to reality. And what is reality, Grandma? Reality is that you can't afford this life. You work for a non-profit that probably pays you in gratitude and good feelings. You're engaged to a man who plays with fish for a living. You've booked a venue that costs more than most people's houses. Something doesn't add up. Marin had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort. She caught my eye, a question in her expression. Do you want me to call security? I gave a tiny shake of my head. Not yet. So what exactly is your plan here? Ask my family. You show up the day before my wedding, cancel my venue, and what? I just go home and forget the whole thing. You come home and let us help you sort out this mess, my mother said, as if this were obvious. We'll deal with whatever debts you've accumulated. We'll help you end this engagement gracefully, and then you can start over, maybe with someone more suitable. More suitable? Callum's voice was dangerously flat. You mean someone with money? I mean someone who can provide for her properly. My mother didn't even pretend to soften the blow. Someone from a good family. Someone who didn't grow up in. She let the sentence trail off and turned her gaze back to Callum. Where did you grow up, Callum? A farming community in the northern Central Valley. My parents are teachers, Callum said. They worked hard to give me opportunities. I'm proud of where I come from. Yes. My mother's dismissive tone said everything. Well, pride doesn't pay for Briarcliff Hall. Catherine, that's enough. Nora stepped forward, her small frame rigid with anger. You've insulted my son, my husband, and our entire family. You've tried to cancel a wedding that isn't yours to cancel. And you've done all of this based on assumptions that you've never bothered to verify. What's there to verify? My father spread his hands. We know what Leora makes. We know what Callum makes. We know what this venue costs. The math doesn't work. Maybe your math doesn't work, I said. Maybe you don't have all the numbers. My mother laughed. Oh, sweetheart, what numbers could we possibly be missing? Did you win the lottery, find buried treasure, rob a bank? She glanced at the rest of the family, inviting them to share the joke. Please enlighten us. Where did the money come from? Before I could answer, Marin's tablet buzzed. She glanced at it, and something shifted in her expression. A flicker of understanding or perhaps relief. If you'll excuse me for just a moment, she said. There's a call I need to take. She stepped away but not far. Just to the edge of the foyer, where she could still be heard if she spoke loudly enough. And speak loudly she did. Yes, sir. Yes, they're here now. The Holloway family. Yes. Was. No, sir. The bride hasn't authorized anything. They're claiming, yes, exactly. Another pause, longer this time. I understand completely. I'll let them know you're on your way." She ended the call and returned to the group, her professional smile now carrying a hint of something I could only describe as anticipation. "The property owner has been informed of the situation," she announced. "He's asked me to convey that no cancellations or changes will be made without the explicit written consent of the bride. He's also coming down to address your concerns personally." The property owner. My father's eyes narrowed. "I thought Briarcliff Hall was owned by some LLC. A development company." "Briarcliff Estate Holdings," Marin confirmed. "The managing partner prefers to be involved personally when there are disputes." "Perfect." My mother drew herself up to her full height, which was considerable even without her heels. "Let him come. I'm sure once he hears the situation, he'll understand that this wedding isn't going to happen. Regardless of whatever fantasy Leora has constructed, the reality is that she can't pay for any of this." "Mrs. Halloway," Marin's voice was carefully neutral, "I'm not sure you fully understand the situation." "I understand perfectly. My daughter has gotten in over her head, and now it's up to the adults to clean up the mess." She turned to me, her expression shifting to something that might have been sympathy if it weren't so laced with judgment. "It's not your fault, Leora. You've always wanted things you couldn't have. But wanting doesn't make it so." I was quiet for a long moment, looking at my mother, really looking at her. This woman who had given me life but had never seemed to actually see me. Who had praised Delaney's every accomplishment while dismissing mine as cute hobbies. Who had made it clear from childhood that success meant money, status, and marrying well, and that anything less was failure. "You know what I've always wondered, Mom," said finally. "Why you never asked about my work. In 12 years at the foundation, you've never once asked what I actually do. You answer phones and plan fundraisers. We know what you do. I'm the executive director. I've been for 6 years. Before that, I was the director of programs. Before that, I was a program manager. I worked my way up. Just like Dad always said people should." My father waved this away. "Executive director of a tiny nonprofit is still just a nonprofit. You make what? 65,000 a year. 70. 68, I said. "And you're right. It doesn't change anything. Because my salary isn't how I paid for this wedding." "Then how?" The question was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the grand staircase. Everyone turned to look. A man was descending in his mid-30s, wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt, his dark hair slightly disheveled. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his surroundings. Because this was his home. Because he was my brother. "Sorry I'm late," Declan said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "I was on a call with the San Francisco office." He nodded at Marin. "Thanks for the heads up." My mother had gone very pale. "Declan," she said, "what are you doing here?" "I live here, Mom." Declan crossed to stand beside me, draping an arm over my shoulders. "Or did you forget that while you were trying to cancel Leora's wedding?" "Declan Halloway," my father said slowly. "You own Briarcliff Hall. I bought it 3 years ago. It was falling apart and I liked the bones." He shrugged. "Leora helped me with the restoration. She has a good eye for design. Probably would have been an architect if anyone had ever encouraged her." My mother's eyes darted between us, trying to calculate this new equation. "So you're paying for her wedding as some kind of charity?" "I'm paying for her wedding because she's my sister and I love her. Because she's marrying a good man who makes her happy." Declan's voice hardened. "And because she deserved to have one day that wasn't about you trying to make her feel small." "We weren't trying to make her feel small," Aunt Bernice protested weakly. "Really?" "Because it sounded a lot like you were calling her broke, delusional, and incapable of making her own decisions. In front of her fiancé's family." Declan turned to the Iveses, his expression softening. "Nora, Stephen, I'm sorry you had to witness that. The Holloway family has a long history of being terrible to anyone who doesn't fit their idea of success. Declan, that's not fair, my mother said. We were trying to protect her. You were trying to control her like you've always tried to control all of us. Declan's arm tightened around my shoulders. The difference is, I escaped early enough to build my own life. Delaney gave in and became exactly what you wanted. And Leora? He looked at me with something like pride. Leora found a way to be herself while you were too busy being disappointed in her to notice. We're not disappointed, my father said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. We just wanted more for her. More of what? More money. More status. More misery. Declan shook his head. She runs a non-profit that provides housing assistance to homeless families. She's helped over 10,000 people find stable housing in the past decade. She makes $68,000 a year, and she's happier than Delaney has ever been in her $1.9 million house with her investment banker husband. Delaney's face flushed red. Excuse me. It's true and you know it, Declan said, not cruelly, just matter of fact. I'm not saying your life is bad, Delaney. I'm saying you live by their rules, and their rules don't actually make anyone happy. They just make people rich, respectable, and miserable. The foyer had gone silent except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the bluffs outside. My grandmother was leaning heavily on her cane, her face unreadable. My parents looked like they had been physically struck. The wedding is tomorrow, Declan continued. Leora is getting married here in this house to the man she loves. The venue is paid for. The catering is paid for. The flowers, the music, the photographer, all paid for. Not because Leora couldn't afford a wedding, but because I wanted to give my sister one day of absolute peace without any of you finding a way to ruin it. But you didn't tell us, my mother said. All these years, you didn't tell us you owned this place. You didn't tell us you were back in contact with Leora. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did, Declan said flatly. You would find a way to make it about you. Take credit for my success. To use my money to control Leora the way you use yours to control Delaney. He paused. I stayed away to protect myself. I stayed connected to Leora because she was the only one who ever loved me without conditions. My mother's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. I love all my children. You love the children who do what you want. You tolerate the ones who don't. Declan finally released me and took a step toward our mother. When I dropped out of law school to start my first company, you told me I was throwing my life away. When I was sleeping on a friend's couch because I couldn't make rent, you offered to help, but only if I came home and took the job Dad lined up for me. When I finally succeeded, you suddenly wanted to introduce me to your friends as your entrepreneur son. He shook his head. You never cared about me. You cared about what I represented. That's not. My mother started, but Declan cut her off. When's my birthday, Mom? She blinked. What? When is it? A horrible silence stretched out. I watched my mother's face cycle through confusion, effort, and finally a shame so profound it seemed to age her years in seconds. March, she tried. March 15th. November 2nd, Declan said quietly. I turned 35 last month. Did you call? Send a card. My mother had no answer. Leora calls every year, Declan continued. She sends a gift. She remembers my favorite foods, my favorite books, the name of my cat. She asks about my work because she's actually interested, not because she wants to brag about it. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Callum's arm came around me, steady and warm. She's the only person in this family who ever made me feel like I mattered, Declan said. Not for what I could do or become, just for who I was. So yes, he said, his voice hardening again. I'm paying for her wedding. I'm hosting it in my home. And tomorrow, I'm going to walk her down the aisle, assuming Dad doesn't want the honor after today's performance. My father looked stunned. Of course I want to walk her down the aisle. She's my daughter. Then act like it. The words landed with finality. Tomorrow you will be here. You will be supportive. You will smile in photos and make pleasant conversation with Callum's family. You will not make comments about money, careers, or who deserves what. Another silence. Then slowly my father nodded. Good. Declan turned to Marin. Could you show the Halloways to the guest cottage? I think everyone needs time to cool down before the rehearsal dinner. Of course, sir. As my family filed out, subdued and uncertain, Grandmother Edith paused. I remember, she said quietly. Remember what? Declan asked. November 2nd. You were born during a storm. She smiled softly. And Leora used to save her allowance to buy you birthday presents. She reached out, touching his cheek, then mine. I know this family values the wrong things. I was too set in my ways to change it. But I'm proud of you. Both of you. She followed the others out. Later, the wedding was everything I had dreamed of, and nothing my family had expected. And for the first time in my life I felt seen.